1928. It was the toughest train ride of his life. Walt Disney, the budding movie producer, was returning from New York to LA after months of hard work, endless deal making and arranging loans with nothing to show for it. No deal, no income, and the bulk of his loyal staff were about to abandon him for the competition. So 4 days on a train was a long time to reflect and play out how things could have been, but they turned out to be the four most crucial days of Disney's career. Walt Disney was born in Chicago in 1901 and spent his early years on a farm in Marceline, Missouri. Fun times for a young farm lad, but with falling crop prices and his father's lack of farming ability, the farm was sold when he was 9 and the family packed up and moved to Kansas City. It was a culture shock for him moving from hogs and horses to the big city. And when he wasn't at school, he was helping his father manage a newspaper delivery run. Drawing provided Disney with an escape from the boredom of school life as he began to hone his natural talent. He took classes at the City Art Institute and by high school was the cartoonist for the school magazine. He drew posters for school events, adverts for local theatres, and even brokered a deal with the local barber to supply comical drawings in exchange for free haircuts. At 17, he landed his first job for a commercial art company. When he was laid off several months later due to falling sales, he decided to launch out on his own and started a firm with fellow artist Ub Eworks. This venture didn't last long either, so with Eworks' blessing, they parted company and he took a job making short animated advertising pictures. At the time, the animation industry was in its infancy, but Disney soon realised he had discovered the perfect blend of his playful nature and drawing aptitude. He was going to become a movie animator. Outside work hours, he started producing his own short cartoon films in his parents' garage. A group of other enthusiasts joined him, and together their late-night filmmaking sessions produced what he called laughograms. Despite being hopelessly amateur, some local cinemas still screened them as gap fillers around the feature films. Determined there was a large market to be tapped, Disney left his job in 1922 and started his second company aged 21. Convincing investors he was worth the risk, he pursued his vision to make a run of short cartoon films. Disney was enthusiastic, but not the audience. They were into live action films and not cartoons, so receiving very little money from the laughograms and unable to cover production costs, he went bankrupt just over a year later and the business had to be shut down. Promising to make good on his failed loans to Kansas City backers, he decided to leave for Hollywood. In LA, Disney touted samples of his earlier work amongst possible distributors, desperate to win a deal to produce more films, and the early responses were not good. But after months of letters and hopeful meetings, finally he got a break. A local distributor signed him to produce a series of short films based on his laughogram concept entitled Alice's Wonderland, with a live actor surrounded by cartoon playmates. He finally had a deal, but no team to produce the films. Instead of going it alone, he took the prudent step of engaging someone with an entirely different skill set and temperament to his own, his brother Roy. Financially minded and more cautious than his creative brother, Roy would prove to be an important anchor to the Disney organisation in the years to come. Calling themselves the Disney Brothers Film Studio, they were underway. Their business was a low-budget affair. Keeping the outgoings down, they went flatting together and even split meals at local diners. Every last dime they could scrape up was thrown at production, as Walt wrote the storylines, directed the pictures and drew the animations, while Roy took care of business and manned the camera. The initial films were poor quality and the distributor had reservations, but the two worked hard to improve their product. 4 short films later, the distributor increased the offer. Supported by heavy loans from family and friends, by 1925 Disney Brothers was producing one cartoon every 3 weeks, with 9 staff, including Walt's old pal, Ub Eworks, back on board. Walt's domestic life was on the up as well, tying the knot with the maid of honour from Roy's wedding, Lillian Bounds. Things started to come together with small profits, but still not enough for Walt and Roy to draw a regular salary. Even so, the studio's output justified a move to a larger building. Meantime, Walt began working on an entirely new concept for cartoon character. Up until this point, filmmakers were using cartoon characters as the butts of gags or pranks, but Walt had in mind introducing one with its own personality, calling it Oswald the Rabbit. It was a good move. When major player Universal Pictures caught a glimpse, they were sold, signing a deal for 26 short films with Walt's New York distributor. It was the first time a major film studio had ever shown an interest in his work. In theatres, the trade press were also enthused. Disney was on to something new. Soon Oswald merchandise appeared in stores, and Disney had to increase his staff to 22. By 1928, off the back of Oswald's popularity, Disney's New York distributor signed a 3-year contract with Universal to deliver Oswald, now the best-selling short cartoon of the day. All that remained was for Walt to crunch out his own agreement with the distributor to make the pictures. He was justifiably confident the tough grind was behind him. With a major cartoon character in his hands, he knew he could negotiate a strong deal. Lillian would get the house she wanted, the studio could clear its debt, and he could take production to the next level. He even convinced Lillian to travel with him to New York for the occasion. After 3 years of marriage, the trip would be a second honeymoon. But in New York, things didn't go to plan. Walt was hoping for $2,500 per film. The distributor offered even less than he was currently getting, and then he dropped a bombshell. Unbeknown to Walt, he'd been talking to animators at the Disney studio, and with only a few exceptions, the distributor was ready to hire the entire Disney Brothers staff and start making the films on his own, leaving Walt out in the cold. What's more, Disney had no copyright. He had signed the rights to Oswald and all the merchandising over to his distributor. Walt was furious. With no way back, he realised he'd lost not only Oswald, but his contract, his income, and most of his workforce, and to top it off, had blown $1,000 on a 2-week trip to New York. His dream of making it in the movie industry was in tatters. Boarding the train for the trip home to LA, his frustrations boiled over. For hours he fumed at Lillian about betrayal and deceit in the movie industry. He was angry at himself for having let his guard down, at the distributor for his shady dealings, and at his staff for their disloyalty. Lillian was in disbelief, now facing a life with uncertain income and a husband without a job. But all was not lost. Disney still possessed the ability to create. As he gazed out the carriage windows, he realised it was useless fighting over what was lost. He needed to rise again and lead from the front. He didn't need Oswald, he could go one better, an entirely new character, one that would outdo Oswald, and one that the Walt Disney Studio would own completely. In his mind, he started churning over Charles Lindbergh's historic 1927 flight across the Atlantic. Grabbing some sheets of paper, he started jotting down a storyline about an aviation adventure starring a mouse. Excitedly, he shared the plot with Lillian, who listened avidly to her husband's new concept, right up to the point where Walt made his final pronouncement. "I think we should call him Mortimer," he declared proudly. Lillian was aghast. Mortimer was a horrible name for a mouse, she spluttered.
"I think you should call him Mickey."
The name stuck and the idea began to brew, but there was no cash, no deal, and no movie. All he had was an idea, but it was his idea, and this time his alone. On his return, he shared it with his trusted ally eWorks, one of the few who had declined the distributor's offer. Hastily, Walt sketched a tall, skinny mouse. eWorks balked at the sight of it. Picking up his pen, he sketched a shorter, rounder figure with large trademark ears and lively eyes. That was it. But the pair had a problem. Tension in the studio had reached fever pitch. Animators who had signed over to the distributor were still working on the last few Oswald films under contract. Staff were so paranoid they were taking their pens and pencils home at night as the standoff between defectors and loyalists escalated. To keep the new idea under wraps, eWorks locked himself away in a room at the studio and secretly went to work on animations for the first Mickey Mouse short film. In the evening, when the other animators had left, Walt took the drawings home to a hastily erected garage studio where Lillian and her sister-in-law painted the drawings, while a local employee started filming. Rapidly, Mickey was coming to life. Making a movie is one thing, but selling it would be another. The initial response from audiences in some local theatres was enthusiastic, but distributors weren't that keen, so they didn't see it as standing out from other cartoon creations on the market. Then in May 1928, during a discussion with Roy, he discovered the inspiration he was looking for. They would make cartoons with sound and characters that speak, something nobody had done before. Walt and his crew faced tough new challenges on how to animate speech and what gestures would accompany the voices. 2 months later, the film was completed and ready for sound dubbing. Perfecting the system would take yet another 2 months and more money. The studio orchestra had difficulty matching the sound and tempo of the cartoon film, so Walt had a small ball printed on a reel of film that rose and fell according to the tempo required of the music. This small innovation alone gave him a year's lead over other studios who tried to follow. The 18th of November 1928, Steamboat Willie, the first Mickey Mouse cartoon with sound, is screened at the only theatre in town that would take it. It was a sensation. Disney had lifted animation to a whole new dimension. It had taken Disney 10 years of hard slog before achieving the big breakthrough with Mickey Mouse. Twice he had attended art school for additional art classes. These were lean and difficult times for him, going without meals and sleeping in his office to save on rent. What drove Disney was not necessarily the quest to strike it rich, but a desire to do one better, from his first animated commercials to his rabbit with personality, through to the globally loved Mickey Mouse. He didn't simply replicate what everyone else was doing, he just kept innovating and improving. Within 2 years of the launch and success of Mickey Mouse, there came merchandising, comic strips and Mickey Mouse clubs for kids. By 1934, Walt's studio of 22 from 6 years earlier had grown to 187 staff. Following this, the rest was history, as the Disney machine began taking off, becoming a global entertainment leader, and in the years ahead a production line of blockbuster animated movies was standard. The films, characters and fairy tales led the way for Walt's creation of the first Disneyland theme park, which he opened in Anaheim, California in 1955. 11 years later, sadly, Walt's life was cut short by lung cancer in 1966, aged 65, while at the time he and Roy had been planning the construction of a huge Disney World resort in Florida. Following Walt's death, Roy postponed his retirement 5 years to ensure the completion of his brother's vision, renaming it Walt Disney World when he opened the resort in October '71. After finally getting to his retirement, Roy also sadly passed away from a stroke, only 2 months after the opening. Further theme parks have since opened in Tokyo in 1983, Paris '92, Hong Kong '05 and Shanghai 2016. As the years passed, following generations of the Disney family would have less involvement in the organisation, and today less than 3% stake in the company. From humble beginnings back when nearly all was lost, Walt Disney led his family and studio team to build one of the biggest entertainment brands on the planet. I hope you enjoyed the story.